do our reviews here is a little bit different. We won't have a rules explanation up front. If you haven't seen our rules video, you can look in the playlist, which I believe is over on this side on YouTube. And in that playlist, you'll find a components video, an unboxing, a rules video, and a gameplay video for Star Realms. So feel free to check those out. But right now, we're going to go ahead and get into our review. So at this point, my wife and I have played something around, I haven't checked BGG to see what the exact numbers are, but I believe it's somewhere around 25, 30 games of Star Realms. So let's jump right into some of the positives and some of the negatives. One thing I like about it a lot is it's a very fast-paced deck building game. You're never going to have a game that lasts usually longer than 15 minutes. I think once or twice my wife and I have gotten up to 20, maybe 25 minutes, and the only way that happened was both of us were using a strategy that increased our authority a good bit. So we wouldn't be dealing quite as much damage to each other. We were also both increasing our own authority, and so the game took a little bit longer because we weren't able to decrease the other's authority to 0 quite fast enough. Even in a situation like that, it's still a 20-minute game usually, which is a pretty quick game. The artwork for this game is absolutely fantastic. I really like all the different factions. I feel like each faction is, you can look at the ship and immediately know which faction it belongs to. And the artwork really pops out at you. There's a couple of them in particular that I think are really, really cool looking. The Dreadnought for the Star Empire is probably my favorite looking ship. It's also one of my favorite cards in the game. But each of the factions are very interesting and have their a very unique feel to each of them. There's clear separation as far as here's this faction, what they do. Here's so you got the Trade Empire. They're all about increasing authority and increasing your trade. And you're probably going to have some draw card effects in there as well. Then you've got the Machine Cult. And they're this group of people that basically started worshiping machines. Started worshiping their ships and their technology. So they're all about discarding. They're all about scrapping cards from your deck, so that you're paring down the deck to the essentials. And really, what they're doing is getting rid of what they view as useless technology. That's kind of the theme there. Then with the Star Empire, they're this high octane, they're all about having the initiative. So they cause your opponent to discard cards a lot. They'll have some draw card effects for you as well. And as far as the human factions go, they're the most powerful in terms of combat. Then you've got the Blob faction, which is the only alien faction in the game, and they are just all out full frontal assault. You get a couple of those in your deck. If you're able to put 3 or 4 of them out in a turn, then you have done some serious damage. But in the meantime, they've got a couple of trade cards, obviously, but they're not super strong in trade. They're not super strong or they're not strong at all in rebuilding authority. It's not what they do. So if you got to make sure that if you're going to be going a blob based deck, that you're going to get them out there quickly and deal the damage you need to in a hurry. And that brings me to that there are some definite strategies in the game. There's not only definite strategies, but there's different strategies depending on which faction you're going to focus on. Maybe you're going to try to focus on just one faction, and you're going to try to build on those faction abilities for just that one faction. Or maybe you're going to get 3 or 3 factions. Or maybe what you'll do is any card that says draw a card on it, you're going to pick up all those from the trade row. So there's lots of different strategies. I like that a lot in a game with it's this little tiny game, but there's so many different strategies that you can use to try to be successful in your game. And that brings you to the fact that the game is portable. This box right here will fit probably in your pocket or maybe in a cargo pocket. But it's easy enough to pack into a bag if you're going on a quick little trip somewhere. Have it with you. And not only is it portable, but if you have somebody to play a game with and they're not familiar with Star Realms, it's super easy to teach. There's not a big learning curve here. Very, very mild learning curve. The most difficult aspect of the game is keeping track of all your trade and combat in your head each turn, and as the faction abilities snowball on each other. Those are the things that are probably the most difficult to learn as a new person, is when all these different things trigger. But that's not that difficult. So once a new person has that down, then they've got the game down, and you can play with just about anybody. Also, I like that in the trade row, there's usually going to be some pretty interesting choices there. You're going to have several of the factions out there. You usually have at least 3 of them out there. Sometimes you have all 4. On occasion, you will find that the trade row will bog down with one faction, and unfortunately in the base game, there's no card to clear out the entire trade row. From what I've heard in some of the expansions, there are cards that will clear the entire trade row. You do have cards in the base game that let you scrap a single card from the trade row, so that'll help out a little bit. And also, there's something like that can be used tactically to prevent your opponent from getting cards they're trying to get. But overall, there are interesting choices in the trade row. And then with the cards that make your opponent discard, they're gonna, especially in the later game, end up having some interesting choices as far as what they're going to discard. All right, some of the cons for the game, though. One of the big cons is that, depending on how the trade row shows up initially, it's possible that there will be only one viable strategy for that game, or maybe 2 viable strategies. And so it kind of forces both players to probably choose the same route as far as what they're going to try to do. And I think that's unfortunate in a game where there are so many possible strategies in the game that sometimes it can be whittled down to both players have one strategy that they have to go for because that's all that's showing up in the trade row. Now this is one that, in my personal opinion, I feel that the Machine Cult, it's almost necessary to pull a couple of cards of the Machine Cult into your deck every game to scrap cards out of your deck, because the Machine Cult's the only one that will scrap cards in your deck. There's other factions that will scrap cards in the trade row, but in your deck, the Machine Cult's the only one. I will say though that my wife actually completely disagrees with this point. She finds that a lot of times she doesn't have to use the Machine Cult at all. She thinks that over the course of the game, if you only pull a couple of them in, then it's not going to be that big of a difference. In her opinion, if you're going to use Machine Cult, you need to go all in for it. And otherwise, just having 1 or 2 of them in your decks is not going to make that big of a difference. So that's something, that's probably something that different people are going to have different viewpoints on. I do think it's unfortunate that the Machine Cult is the only faction that allows you to scrap cards from your hand. But I suppose, that's kind of their thing. And so take that for what it's worth. The score cards are dumb. The cards that come with the game, you saw me in these things right here. Right here. You saw me in a previous video rip them up. And I'm not joking. They're absolutely ridiculous. Don't use them. They're obnoxious to handle. Use a sheet of paper like you saw me doing in the gameplay video. There's just no reason for that much fiddliness with a game like this. There's no reason to have those. Only reason I even still have them with me is because I just have a hard time throwing something like that away, even though I did rip one up, so I guess. Also, this is probably my biggest complaint for the game, is that while there are some pretty interesting choices in the trade row, there are no choices in your hand. Once you pull a card out of the trade row, once you make that choice, stick it in your deck, at that point, it's however it comes up, because you're never going to leave anything in your hand. There's no point to leave anything in your hand. There's no benefit to leaving anything in your hand, and there's no detriment for putting it out on the board. So every hand, you're going to lay down everything in your hand, and then that's going to be it. The one choice that you have from your hand is if you don't have any cards in your discard pile, so you've just drawn a fresh new set of cards, you just reshuffle the deck, and you have a Machine Cult card that says you can discard, you can scrap a card from your hand or your discard pile, then you're going to play that one first, and then that way you can choose which card in your hand you're going to scrap. Otherwise, there's no choices out of your hand. And as far as the skill to luck balance in this game, I'd say it's pretty well balanced, with luck having a slight edge on your skill. Because obviously the skill's going to come in choosing your ships, all that kind of stuff, choosing your ships and bases. But then after that, everything else is luck. But obviously the luck is mitigated by what you have chosen. So I feel that basically what you've got is you got luck in what's in the trade row, your skills in choosing what's in the trade row, and then you've got luck again in how the items that you chose come out of your personal deck. Let's get to the final score here. For originality, I gave this game a 1.25 out of 2. What we've got here is a game where they've created these factions. They've gone ahead and given some backstories to these factions. So, I think that gives it a little bit above the halfway mark there. Give it a 1.25. I can't go any higher than that because ultimately this is just a fairly simple deck building game with a lot of really cool theme and cards put into it. So originality 1.25 out of 2. For aesthetics, and what we're talking about here is just the how everything looks. Not going to be we're not talking about the quality of components yet. We'll get to that. As far as how everything looks, the artwork and the layout of the cards, the graphic design. I'm going to give this a 3 out of 3. I think the graphic design is great. It's very clear what's going on. The faction icons are completely different, so there's never any doubt about what's going on there. The artwork is fantastic. I love the artwork in this game. I really have no complaints about any of the aesthetics of the game, so I got to give it a full 3 out of 3. So then let's go to component quality. It's a card game, so what can you really ask for in a card game component quality? Well, I will say that, as many of you may have heard in my previous videos, I think the standard card stock is a little bit on the thin side, especially for, and this is in most games these days, but for a game where you're handling where the whole point of the game is to handle cards, I wish the card stock was a little bit thicker. So you're gonna knock it a little bit for that. It would have been nice if they provided a better way to count your authority. As it is, the cards are absolutely useless, but you can just use a pen and paper, so that's not a big deal. Maybe it would have been cool if if they gave you something to keep track of your trade and your combat, but that happens so fast. I mean, you get the trade and then you spend it immediately. It's not like you're storing trade over turns, so that's not a big deal either. Ultimately, I think that my biggest thing is if there was just a better way to keep track of your authority. Maybe if there had been a folding card with, authority track and 2 little markers that you could keep track of your authority with. Mark it down, move the markers down the track there. I don't know, something like that. The cards were a waste of space. I would have rather had more faction cards in there instead of those ridiculous authority cards. So ultimately, for component quality, 3 out of 4, still a really good score. Just a couple of probably, you could argue, nitpicky things, but I do find them important. Oh, and let's not forget, the box itself is completely, it's really thin, and if you watch my unboxing, you can see it ripped open with me just trying to get in the box because of how tightly it was packed. Thrill factor, this game is fun. It is really exciting from the first moment you play. From the very first hand, this game is exciting. I love it. It's fast. You've got, sometimes you'll have these wild swings. You'll have hands where you keep playing down draw cards, and then when you draw a card, that one's also another draw card, or you can get your opponent discard down to 1 card, and I mean there's so much going on in this game, considering the size of it. And yet the simplicity of it, I mean, how is that not fun? All these things going on, so simple to learn. For thrill factor, I gave this a 3 out of 3. I just think it's a lot of fun, and you can play 3-4 games in a row in an hour's time. It's just a lot of fun. So for overall gameplay, I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5, and the reason for that is I feel with a few more choices, if they gave you a few more choices in your hand, if there was some way to mitigate the board getting taken over by the faction that nobody's playing with in this game, because everybody's pulling their factions out of the trade row, and what gets left behind is you got a whole trade row full of Trade Federation, or a whole trade row full of Blob, or whatever the faction is that's not being used. Because there's usually one faction in a game that doesn't get used a whole lot. If there was some way to mitigate that in the base game, then maybe I would give this that extra half to a point that it's missing there. But as it is, 4 out of 5. And what that brings us to is a total of 83.8% for this game, which is great on my scale. It's going to actually fall second place for the games I've reviewed so far underneath Pandemic in the Lab. I can't recommend this game enough. If you want a quick, fast-paced game, easy to teach, easy to take anywhere you go out, grab Star Realms. Great two-player game, great deck building game. So, that's our review. Thank you for watching. Be sure to watch the previous Star Realms videos. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like my channel, by all means, please subscribe. And until next time, if you're bored online, bored offline.